We talk about many of the important topics having to do with business and consumer subjects. Today, we're going to talk about electric vehicles and some of the evolutions in that market. We're going to talk about some cyber attacks and cyber protection. We're going to talk about vehicle transfers and vehicle titles. There's been some fraud that's been showing up in the marketplace. And then also investigations where certain types of asset searches and due diligence is coming under fire for not being done properly. So first, let's start with the subject of the cyber, because this has been in the news last couple days. There have been some government agencies that were hacked, that were vulnerable to um, different types of uh, hackers, basically going into their system. And if you notice what the article says, there's a vulnerability in a widely used file transfer software. So it's not like this is some advanced type of scheme. This is the US government that were targeted, and they were using a widely used file transfer. So look, if the US government is vulnerable to a hack with all their resources that they could use to defend and prevent against it, what chance does a small or medium-sized company have to protect against the cyber attack? And this is not something unique to the government. It was a widely used software, and there was a vulnerability in that software. How do you protect against that? Well, you could hire and have a full-time in-house cyber defense expert looking at upgrading those vulnerabilities. But I'm sure the US government has those types of resources. So what failed there? Well, more than likely is it was a very new type of vulnerability. It was something that was discovered, within the last couple of days, and the hackers jumped on it right away. Because if you're reactive, you may not have the same type of um, insulation from it as you are if you are proactive. And that's where cyber insurance is different than cyber protection. What happens with cyber insurance is the insurance carrier, not only are they going to react if there is a problem or is a claim, they're going to install and monitor, in most cases, most policies, equipment and apps on your system that will monitor on a day-by-day basis for this type of vulnerability. They're going to monitor it for if your patches need to be updated, because they'll see it in other areas. It's not just one entity that's being monitored. The US government is really just one monolith. Now, granted, they may have different departments, different divisions, but they all use the same type of software. If there's a vulnerability, it may not be discovered because that hack may not hit them first. It may hit a company or some other entity first. And unless there's interoperability between them, one hand's not going to know what the other hand is doing. With cyber insurance carriers, they cover all kinds of industries. So when they see an attack, a vector that hits one particular company, they can then instantly put out a red alert, put up a red flare to all their insurers to say, look, this is a potential vulnerability. And if you have that software on your system, you can be aware of it before the attack even hits. So this is a big deal. The US government, you would think, would be immune to things like this. But in this case, they weren't, because maybe they weren't the first, or they were one of the first ones to get hit. Cyber defense and cyber protection is going to be an increasing subject. We're going to see this in the news on a regular basis. So be aware of it if you're a company or even consumers are starting to get hit. Next up, we're going to talk about electric vehicles. In the electric vehicle market, you're seeing where there's starting to be a little bit more interest in EVs. The purchase intent for consumers is starting to creep up. there's a fear of not finding chargers on road trips, and that's slowing the interest, but there is some more interest in the marketplace. A couple other pieces of news we talked about this week is Toyota has announced they are going to introduce a solid state format battery for EVs, which can have a range of up to 900 miles. What is that going to do for EV purchase interest? It's not going to creep up, it's going to jump up. You start having vehicles with a 900-mile range, that's double what most gasoline cars can have for a range. If you have a 20-gallon gas tank and you get 20 miles per gallon, you're going to be 400 miles. If you have a 20-gallon gas tank with maybe 25 miles per gallon, that's 500 miles. 900 is almost double. So this is going to really make a difference in the purchase interest for electric vehicles. You're going to find more people will now be able to consider it for a second car or maybe even a primary vehicle. If anybody has an electric vehicle, tell us what your real world experience has been like owning that vehicle. Do you get range anxiety? Are you able to take trips? Do you have difficulty finding chargers that are working? One of the things we're starting to see is more of the charger failure rate is reducing, meaning that in the past, 30 or 40% of chargers didn't work. You pull up to a charger, you plug it in, doesn't charge. Now that's starting to get a little bit better. So who knows if that marketplace is starting to improve itself and become more reliable for EV owners. Next, we're going to talk about keeping in the subject of vehicles. We're going to talk about vehicle titles. Look, a vehicle title may seem like just a very basic piece of paper. It may seem like a minor inconvenience. However, a vehicle title has a lot more significance than people think. It's a government document. It is not just a random receipt. That document indicates who is the owner of the vehicle. So take any vehicle, even a low-end vehicle that's worth $3,000. The title is evidence of that $3,000 ownership. So would you leave $3,000 in cash laying around? Would you make it easy to transfer the possession or ownership of that $3,000? No. Same thing with titles. In this case, allegedly, a woman in South Carolina was using title fraud to obtain a title loan. How did this work? Well, if you are the owner of a vehicle and you have your title certificate, you are now in possession of that value. If the vehicle is worth $3,000, the title says you are the owner of that asset. If you lose that certificate and you are the owner, there's a relatively simple process of replacing the certificate. You present yourself to the Department of Motor Vehicles with your ID. They'll look it up in the system and say, yep, you're the owner. We'll give you another title certificate. They might charge you a small fee, $5, $10. However, what that does do is it makes the old title certificate with that title number void, no longer valid. So that way you can't have two titles for the same car. So what this person did was they went and applied for a duplicate title. Duplicate title, fresh new title. But they really didn't lose the old title. They still had the old title. So what they did was they took the old title and they went to a title loan facility and they got a title loan for $1,500. But in the meantime, they actually sold that vehicle to somebody else. So now they didn't own the vehicle and they got the cash from that sale. So now they have the cash from the sale plus the $1,500. And of course, they stopped paying the loan. But now the title loan place is out of luck because they can't grab the vehicle because now somebody else is the legal owner. You may think, well, that's not going to happen to me because I'm not a title loan place, but it could if you're a buyer. What happens if a person with bad intentions decides that they want to double dip a vehicle? What they can do is they can do it the other way around. They can go get a title loan with the valid title, sell it to a private party with the duplicate title. The private party goes to transfer the ownership at the DMV. The DMV says, no, get out of here. This title is void because that title number has been canceled. So be aware that there are ways to do title fraud. And there's another example of that in New Hampshire. He tried to falsely obtain a vehicle title. This is a little different. This is somebody who used fraudulent forged paperwork to try to get a title. Now, he was caught, but the reason this is important for consumers is if you are in a scenario where you have a vehicle, you need to get a title for it, you want to make sure that you are presenting paperwork correctly. If you are missing paperwork, if you don't have a bill of sale, if the old title was damaged, if the seller didn't give it to you, don't try to use one of these fly-by-night sketchy title methods to try to get over things like a fake mechanics lien, abandoned vehicle. There's a lot of methods that people use that are not correct. And if you do one of those, sometimes the title will be issued, but then it'll get revoked later, and you can get in trouble. You can see on the screen, there's handcuffs here. They don't play around with this. This is serious business. And this person was allegedly to submit fraudulent documents to obtain a title. Anytime you're submitting documents, when you sign it on the bottom, it'll say under penalty of perjury, I swear that this is correct information. And that's the reason why title documents are done in writing. You can't apply for a title online. You can't do it electronically. You can't do it by email. They want to have your ink signature on a piece of paper that says you swear under oath this is true, because you're making statements convincing that Division of Motor Vehicles to give you something worth big money. If it's a $3,000 vehicle, you're asking them to give you a document that's worth $3,000. It's like going to the bank and saying, give me $3,000. Unless you have the right credentials, they're not going to give it to you. The DMV is not going to give you ownership of a vehicle unless you have the right paperwork. So if you submit fraudulent documents, it's more than just slap on the wrist, right? This person was charged with 2 counts of tampering with records, arraigned in in district court, and it's no joke, right? You don't want to play around with vehicle titles. What about title liens? We're going to come back here in a second and talk about liens on a vehicle, how to get them removed, and which ones are valid and which ones are not valid. All right, we're back. In this story, there were several companies that were charged with filing false liens on vehicles by misleading customers. These companies were found to have done predatory title loans. And one company was 700,000, another company was 2.2 million, another was 4.3 million. And some of these companies allegedly were Cash Point, Approved Financial, many other companies were found with this, auto equity loans. And they were putting liens on people's vehicles through false pretenses. They were misleading the borrowers of what the terms of the loan were. So now their vehicle title was encumbered by a lien. And you see here, this is the Office of the Attorney General. This is not a news story. This is a very high level organization. So if you have a lien on your title, you're not able to sell it. You're not able to trade it in. You're not able to do anything with the vehicle until the lien is cleared. Clearing the lien requires a signature of that lien holder. But if there was fraud involved, the Attorney General can step in and do something about that fraudulent lien. So if you have that type of scenario where the lien is in question, you may want to take a look at it to see what options you have, what rights you have about clearing that lien. So next, we're going to come back. We're going to talk about a really important subject of vehicle identification numbers on a vehicle, whether or not you need to have it inspected, whether or not it's something that can be avoided. We'll be back after a quick break from Actual Human.
Are you tired of automated systems and chatbots when you need assistance? Experience actualhuman.com and connect with real professionals, not automation. At actualhuman.com, we bring you a network of professionals who are excited to answer your questions and provide guidance. Getting started is easy. Let us show you how. Here's how it works. Step 1. Select the best date and time for your video call. Step 2. Describe your situation and the areas you're looking for advice. Step 3. Connect one-on-one with an expert and get the undivided attention that you deserve. Experience the difference. Visit actualhuman.com today and schedule your professional consultation. Actualhuman.com. Expert guidance from real people.
Good. So we're going to be back talking again about vehicle titles, but in this case, we're going to talk about vehicle identification numbers and also different types of inspections. One of the things that happens with title transfers is sometimes they require that there's an inspection either of the vehicle or of the VIN number. And here's why. Here's a title certificate we talked about before. Again, this is like a legal document. It's not just a blank sheet of paper. It's got the scroll work. It's got things like watermarks on it. But one of the most important things it has is right here. It's got the VIN number. That's what identifies that vehicle over all others as the one that's being referenced for ownership. So when you submit documents to the Department of Motor Vehicles, they want to make sure that that serial number, that VIN number, is correct. So they're going to have a physical examination of that serial number on the vehicle by an authorized agent, because they don't want to be giving you paperwork and a legal title for the incorrect VIN number. We see this all the time where a document is issued by the Department of Motor Vehicles that has an incorrect VIN number. Very difficult to fix. You can't just say, hey, change this VIN number, because that's like giving you the title for a different car. So they want to make sure up front that this is correct. So here's an example from Oregon. They require that you have to have a VIN inspection done if you're bringing a vehicle from out of state, if it's titled for the first time after being assembled, or if it's totaled, if it is a salvage title. There's a couple different reasons why you have to get a VIN inspection. In some cases, and here's the reason why. They want to make sure that the VIN on your vehicle matches the title or ownership document, right? They want to make sure it matches. There's no errors on it. And who can do it? You can have it done by the DMV, the official titling authority, a licensed dealer in Oregon, and some states allow that, or the DEQ. This is a company that does, or a organization that does emissions testing, and they can also do VIN testing. In addition to those entities, sometimes you have to have a physical inspection of the vehicle for safety to make sure it's properly equipped. It has good brakes. It's got good tires. Nothing is dangerous in driving it. And there's some leeway allowed in doing that. But here's what happens. There's fraud there too. In Texas, there was a series of vehicle inspections that were done fraudulently. Basically, there were companies and there were repair shops that were doing fake safety and emissions inspections. And in order to get your vehicle title changed or your registration renewed, many times you have to do an inspection. Until you get that inspection, you're not getting your title or registration. State license inspection stations are the ones who do it. There are unscrupulous people who manipulate those tests so it guarantees a passing result, right? And then they skipped the state required checks of brakes, tires, and other safety equipment. This is not something the government wants to do. You may think that the inspection is overkill and it's excessive and you shouldn't have to do it. That's fine, but that's in the law. And there's a lot of stations that do it, and they want to block them if they're suspected of fraud for continuing to pass tests. And they need to find out what the software they're using, because the software is what's being manipulated in order to do these fake vehicle inspections. And this is something that's causing a great deal of concern for the licensing bureau. One of the things that can happen from it is you can have dangerous cars on the road, and the owner of the car could be at risk, but also other people that are driving near the car could also be at risk. Next, we're going to take a look at a couple types of fraud. And in this case, it was a dealership that was the victim of fraud. What happened was in Iowa, there was an organization that a criminal entity was using a website impersonating the actual dealership. This dealership was called Petty Motors, licensed and legitimate car dealership in Iowa. And a fraudulent organization created a website and a fake email address and a fake phone number to try to collect money from people wanting to buy a car. And it was a vehicle scam. And, if you were looking at vehicle ads, looking at classified sales listings for vehicles, you might see Petty Motors. Okay, great. I like this car. I want to buy it. Maybe you looked up Petty Motors and you saw where they were located, but you didn't want to go there right away. Some of these ads were done in other states. So they would collect a deposit, allegedly, from potential buyers and then just take off with the money. And it wasn't the real dealership. So a lot of these people were victims, either giving money for cars and never getting the cars, or giving money for cars and never getting titles. So fraud can be something perpetrated on a dealership. And some dealerships are also guilty of fraud themselves. But this is an example where you want to double check. And if it's a transaction you're doing, which is a large dollar amount, you may want to do it in person, not just over the internet. And last but not least, we're going to talk about another example where a dealership also was a victim. In this case, they were embezzled. Not only were they embezzled by employees, but they hired a forensic accounting firm to investigate the fraud. Well, that accounting firm actually is being sued now by the dealership for not properly investigating the fraud. Now, it's unknown whether or not this forensic accounting firm was a licensed investigative agency. Most of the time, they're not. There's a lot of companies out there that are trying to perform investigations in unlicensed capacity. Private investigating is a licensed activity. Anybody who is involved with investigations and fraud and asset searches has to have a license in order to do that. And in order to get the license, you have to prove experience, you have to prove knowledge, you have to pass exams, you have to do continuing education every year. But because of the fact that it's a little bit of a Wild West, there's a lot of companies out there or people that are trying to represent to do investigations without a license. It's unknown whether or not this company is, but very few companies that would get sued or do it the wrong way are going to be licensed. If you're licensed, you're going to protect your license and do things the right way. But in this case, the dealership was double scammed. First, that they had multiple embezzlement schemes by employees. And then when they went to look into that, their accounting firm or forensic accounting firm investigator did something wrong. Internal embezzlement is very common. It's one of the most common requests we get in our agency for investigations. Company ownership executives will suspect that there's money missing. The numbers don't add up. The KPIs don't add up. The profit margins don't add up. And they say, well, something's got to be wrong. And they'll look into it and they'll find that there's one or more employees that are embezzling money. It's way more common than you think. We probably get 200 or 300 inquiries a year from companies that have suspected embezzlement. In almost every case that we look at, we find an actual embezzlement. I think there was 1 or 2 times last year that a company owner suspected embezzlement that we didn't find it. And it's usually somebody you don't expect. Usually it's a very trusted employee, a longtime employee, somebody you didn't think would happen. In fact, many times when we tell our client, this is what's happening, here's the evidence, here's the documentation, it's Joe. They say there must be a mistake. It can't be Joe. It has to be somebody else. And the evidence is there, mostly because they're the ones most in a position to do it. And they're the ones who have the most access to the sensitive information to embezzle on a regular basis. Sometimes this embezzlement happens accidentally. Sometimes a person in a company will discover accidentally that they have the ability to transfer large amounts of money through a wire transfer. They find it out by accident. And then nothing happens initially, but later on in their life, maybe they have a health expense. Maybe they have some type of financial problem and they say, I need this money. And they're hesitant and they're skeptical, but they'll bring themselves in their mind to justify it by saying, well, I was passed over for promotion. I am not getting paid as much as I should, or the boss was mean to me, or the owner doesn't respect me. Then they'll go ahead and take the money. And this could be a deal breaker, right? And you may think it's not a lot of money, but we had a client last year who somebody stole $120,000 from this client over the course of a year. And $120,000 is a lot of money, but it's not a huge amount. But this business had about $1.5 to $1.8 million in sales. So they were a decent sized business. They weren't huge, but they sold 1.8. Well, their profit margin was 20% on 1.5, which means they earn at the end of the year $300,000 net profit on that 1.5 in sales. 1.5 in sales is just what you take in, then you pay all your expenses, your payroll, your rent, your cost of sales, and you end up keeping their profit margin was 19 point something percent, and it should have been about 300 grand. Well, they only booked about 170,000 in profit. Think if they had that extra 120 that the employee stole, right? They still have to pay all the commissions on the full 1.5, but they were short 120. They would have had about twice as much money. What would they have done with it? Well, maybe the owner would take it as a profit, but maybe they would have invested it. That could be another employee. That could be more advertising. That could be more marketing to increase your sales the next year. So it's more than just losing the money. It's also losing the opportunity. As a business, you invest money in different things. You have what's called a return on investment. Every time you spend $1 in business, you're looking to get back maybe 5 of those dollars in additional sales. So by losing out on that 120,000 in real dollars, it's not like $120,000 less off the top in sales. It's 120 after all the expenses were paid. So that was a devastating blow. If they had that money back, who knows? Maybe they would have sold $2.5 million the next year, but now they're back to square one. Plus, you lose that really good employee. So by having good controls, good internal best practices for prevention, you can maybe keep somebody who's borderline employee that would maybe go rogue or go south if they were allowed to from going that route. Sometimes you can keep an employee from embezzling and becoming that person if you constantly verify what everybody's doing and use best practices. So if you are in any type of business, make sure that you're protecting your assets. Make sure you're double checking all your accounting. If you have the interest in speaking live with a licensed person in any of these areas, investigations, insurance, vehicle titles, even things like mediation or surety bonds, you can access through actualhuman.com a way to create a live consultation with professionals in many industries. Appreciate you attending this episode. See you again tomorrow with some more interesting subjects. Put your messages below. Let us know what you want to hear us talk about, and